Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of the committee, my name is John Simmons. I work for the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council. And we're here to provide testimony on 2838. We are in opposition to the current legislation as being proposed. We'd like to take a second first, and I think commend the senator for at least approaching the idea of water coordination, merging with other districts or the Bay Commission or any other water treatment facility. And we believe that that should be something that is analyzed, that is something that is looked at. But we have a problem with the legislation is that when you're taking this regional approach, what is the outcome during this process? Why, for instance, if this was such a fine transaction that there would be 10% savings, why do you need then to match an increase in the rates? If it's such a good idea, why are they not going before the PUC today and seeking that regulatory process that would combine the Narragansett Bay Commission, for instance, and the Providence Water Supply? Why is it exempted in here that for 5 years the PUC does not regulate the entity, the merged entity? Why is it in here that the rates can go up in total what has been done over the last 5 years? Why is it that way? One could have an argument that it could merge with the Narragansett Bay Commission, and the Bay Commission could pay some money, which is contemplated in the bill. That transaction, any money to the city of Providence, is not subject to the PUC regulation. However, they can go up the rate increase that the Narragansett Bay Commission has over the last 5 years on a larger pool of money. And that is contemplated in the statute. It's enabling, but if you take a look at it and you match it out, it says the Bay Commission, Providence could come together and the rate increase can be no larger than the total of the last 5 years of rate increases. So if you did 10%, you could do 10% year one, then a 10% savings in cost, if you believe that there is going to be this type of cost. So we do not understand why you would need this. In fact, it was such a great idea to do the consolidations and mergers, which is already contemplated under current state law, regulated by the PUC. This takes them out from under the PUC for 5 years, the entity that takes on the water supply system, because it can be sewer or water. And we believe that that is a real cause of concern. The second part, there's nothing in this legislation that enhances environmental control or water quality. It just says it, but there's no additional requirements. But the PUC has requirements on the quality of water, and that review would be gone. Also, you don't know what the tax ability of the entity at the end. Does the Narragansett Bay Commission or any other entity that could merge, is it taxable? To say, for instance, Scituate or any other place. So we don't know what the transaction will look like. We don't know what a transaction is. We believe that this is really dangerous for this to occur based upon a very good premise that we need to have mergers and consolidations that if in fact, as the mayor of Minneapolis said, could be 10%. Why do we have to put something else in to this mix? And final point, I want to talk about the ownership of the Providence Water Supply Board. If in fact it was contentious between the PUC and the city about the ownership, it has nothing to do about the regulation of the product of the Bay Commission or the Water Supply Board. The PUC regulates the operation. If in fact there was a difference of opinion between Providence and the PUC, why is it not with the PUC? Why is it not with the court to change it? It would still not affect what they can do about the ownership. It would have to be approved by the PUC, whatever transaction they did. So this is not going at the heart of the matter as far as I can see in the ownership. That can be separate and distinct. That should be between the PUC and the city, or the city in some court action to see who owns the water supply system. We're mixing two different things. This is about ratepayers. And this is about the ratepayers in all of our districts will be impacted by this, and we believe severely. So for that, Madam Chair, we are opposed to it.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. Simmons?
Yeah.
Senator Metz.
Yeah, last part of point number 3. Because the PU,
Your button,
excuse me, I'm
Harold.
sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just your last point, point number 3 about the ownership and the PUC in Providence, and even the PUC, there's people in my community aren't happy with the PUC because they seem to go for every rate increase. So we're concerned about that too. But at least go over that last point for me again. I'd appreciate it.
Well, on the ownership issue, again, there's been some conversation, and for some personal background, I worked for the city of Providence for about 12, 13 years. I did more rate filings probably than most people. I fought with the PUC. I sought for legislation to make some change. What the issue comes, if you look at the PUC as a regulatory entity under state law, if it is decided the ownership issue, and the city is opposed to that, then it should take action with the PUC or court. One of the two options. It is not having the legislation pull the PUC and its regulatory issues away from it, have the Providence Water System lease, sell, whatever it's proposing to do, and there's no limitation in here for what it does or how it changes the structure of it. There is no regulatory process. It's not an oversight. So the issue of ownership can be dealt with directly with the PUC or court action, and not through the legislature removing the PUC from a transaction and saying the PUC can't ever revisit that transaction. Not just for 5 years, but forever.
Senator Jewboy.
Okay, John, thanks for your testimony. One of the questions that I have, John, I think we have to open our eyes on the issue of where the city of Providence is headed financially right now. And there is a potential for bankruptcy or at least some type of reorganization. And the mayor brings a good point that, well, we'd hate to see creditors get at a very, one of the few real remaining assets that the city has. Is that fair to say? It has some value?
I'm going to be treading on, it has value. I'm going to be treading upon dangerous ground. You have a statute that you enacted a number of years ago on any fiscally distressed community. I would look at that first before I would be worried about a bankruptcy issue or an issue of bankruptcy where that asset would be under scrutiny. You did it for your bonds. You changed the way the bonds are being paid. That comes from taxes. You've created a municipal statute for fiscal distressed communities. I would look at that first before I'd be fearful of a bankruptcy where they would take the assets. I don't remember in Central Falls any assets being taken in Central Falls when it actually filed for bankruptcy and came out of the bankruptcy 5 years later.
So I'm not advocating that for the city. I guess the question that I had is that whether it be the legislature or the PUC, if we were to approve some form of disposition of the water supply owned by the city, the question I would have is, would a lease arrangement and ultimate sale be something that should be looked at if it does happen? And what you're looking for in that lease, I don't know how long it would be, but looking at the financial needs of the city, while you would still be able to retain the ownership of the property, that lease payment could be the amount of money that the city needs each and every year in order to keep that pension fund and any other operating costs
You're trying to
afloat.
solve two issues on separate platforms with one piece of legislation. You're trying to look at the water supply system. Providence provides 60% of the water in the state. You're saying, let's change the mechanism for that because then we can take proceeds and give it to the pension system.
Right.
You're doing two different things with one piece of legislation, and we would say each should be looked at separately. You should take a look at the water supply system, whether it's a lease arrangement or something else, it should be for the betterment of the water system. We believe that there should be more of a regional approach. We've testified here last year. We would testify, I think we did on the other side, and we would do here. That needs to be examined by the state. It is a statewide policy. We wrote this 3-4 years ago. As well as this should be a statewide policy. There should be more regional approach. You have a 60% out of Providence. You have 4 or 5 others that are regulated by the PUC that don't have some water. You have 2 or 3 that have excess water, but you can't get it to Kent County because there's no distribution system. Why aren't we addressing that as an issue on water as opposed to fixing Providence's financial requirements. I think you ought to look at them separately and not together.
Thank you. Senator Nessebar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm aware of Providence's fiscal problems, but I will leave that to my competent colleagues from Providence. My question to you, Mr. Simmons, is one, I'm always intrigued by economies of scale, and I often ask questions about essentially regionalization. In this case, is there some talk about having one statewide water system? So if any community owns its asset, hopefully it can be paid appropriately for that. But is there any talk in the state of making it to be one statewide system that perhaps could join with other states or regions, however? And is that where we could achieve economies of scale and have one statewide system be regulated by the PUC?
That is something that ought to be examined, and if I say that, I will be run out of town because of regionalization is such a parochial issue that everyone loves to talk about regionalization of everyone else's water system or sewer, not mine. So regionalization or one system, we believe that it should be a state policy matter to look at. We have water needs, we have economic development needs. Water is in excess in areas, it's short in other areas. We should be looking at that. You have Providence Water selling water across the bay. I realize on the wholesale issue at Kent County, it's always been one of those issues, but one must look at the wholesale sale at Kent County. How does Kent County, if it sells for that price, on the wholesale price, how does it distribute it to its own customers? So they're regulated by the PUC. So when they're selling it, they're buying it wholesale from the Providence, they mark it up for their cost. That has to go through the PUC. Most of the ones that we're selling to are actually regulated by the PUC. So I don't go for that argument, but I would say yes. That you ought to take a step back and take a look at the water system. There's, areas of short and areas of excess water. Every day now, I think it's Pawtucket, Woonsocket just pushes down tons of water that are not being used into the bay.